Hey everyone, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com, and I'm here today with a project start video for this 1/6 scale Armortek radio-controlled German King Tiger heavy tank. The model that you see here is being built for a private commission and will be going to a private collector. As I often mention in these videos, I often take on commission-built projects from vehicles ranging from 1/35 scale all the way up to 1/6 scale. As for availability and pricing information, that information would be best by contacting me through the email address listed below, which is info@eastcoastarmory.com. As for the base starter kit, the model itself started off as a 1/6 scale King Tiger Henschel production kit from the company Armortek. Now, for anyone who is a fan and frequent viewer of the channel, Armortek is not going to be a surprise, as I've built many of their kits in the past videos. For anyone who's stumbling into this video for the first time and is unaware of the company, Armortek is a UK-based 1/6 scale radio-controlled tank model company. They primarily make their models from laser cut and CNC'd aluminum plates. Now, what makes their vehicles unique and what makes them different compared to the other companies that are releasing 1/6 scale kits in the same scale is that their models are actually made from scale thickness components. And on the King Tiger here, this is specifically true for the front plate, which I'll be going over shortly after the filming of this scene. The Armortek King Tiger, for a while, was actually the biggest 1/6 scale kit that they have made, and it is actually one of the heaviest. These models come in at around 300 pounds, and depending on how much more equipment you put in them, can go up more in the weight. This is actually not the first time I've built one of these Armortek King Tigers. The first Armortek King Tiger I've built was back in 2009 or so. In fact, that model was one of the first videos that I started posting on YouTube. In addition to that, one of those videos is actually one of the most watched videos on the ECA channel. Which is actually interesting to point out because literally within a few feet of this model over here, I have my Armortek King Tiger, which has been parked in the shop for a little while now. Now, as for the Armortek King Tiger kit releases, unlike the Tiger or the Panther, which have been re-released by Armortek a number of times, the King Tiger is actually one that has only been released very sparingly. Currently, as of the time and date of this video, Armortek has made 2 batches of the King Tiger. The first batch came out in around 2009, and this model here was released back in 2013. The vehicle that was built and belongs in my personal collection was one of the original batches from 2009 and actually has several differences compared to the version that was released in 2013. Some of the changes were made by Armortek, and it does trickle into the actual production procedures. We'll be going over these changes as well as how to build them as this video build series progresses. Now, like I said before, this model does belong to a private collector. The fellow purchased the kit when new from Armortek back in 2013 when the kits were released. The model sat in a unassembled state until the commissioner decided to send the model over to me to continue with the construction and get it built all the way up to completion. Now, like I often mention in these Armortek start videos, in case anyone is wondering, these kits are not in production, and the way Armortek produces their kits is that they release a certain small batch of number of kits throughout the year. Typically, the way this works is that when a new kit is being designed, they announce the model as a pre-order. When the model is announced as a pre-order, people can actually pre-order the tank, and then once the tanks are done with their production, they get shipped to the customers, and then Armortek announces a new kit. Generally, they announce a new version of a tank, in between also offering a re-release vehicle as well. This is typically true for the Tiger or the Panther, in between releasing a new model, such as like the World War I Mark I tank. Now, again, their production numbers are very limited compared to something like Henlong or Tegan. And once the models are gone, they're no longer in production. Now, in case anyone wants to find a model on the secondhand market, this is doable, and these kits do pop up from time to time on the various online sources. Generally either on forums, on eBay, or even on Craigslist. I've seen 1 or 2 kits pop up. However, the best place to acquire a used Armortek kit is on the Armortek forum via the link that is found in the subject section listed below. There is a link where on their forum it's a classified section, and in case anyone is interested in tracking down a kit, there's a section there where people who have these kits and want to sell them off for one reason or another, and that is where you can acquire the model. These kits can be acquired in any sort of stage during production, from virgin kit to all the way up to being completed and fully painted and turnkey. Now, as for this tank here, like I mentioned before, it was partially started by the builder, in which he took out the panels, added a coat of etch primer to a few of the hull panels, as well as installing the suspension bushings, which we'll be going over as the video progresses. It is from that point there where I was able to get the build up to this point here. And to get a look at what the model looked like when I first took it out of the packaging, in order to get a sheer idea on the size and scale and even weight of these pieces, let's go ahead and take a step back to when the model was first opened and started. And here is the project literally just being started. Here we have the components for the lower hull of the King Tiger. Like all Armortek kits, the components are comprised out of scale thickness laser cut pieces of aluminum. This is true for both the side hull as well as the rest of the vehicle. Now, for this vehicle being a King Tiger, Armortek went ahead and they have the lower plate into 2 portions, which is very true to the real vehicle. You have this aluminum plate here for the aft end of the lower hull, and for the forward section we have here this thicker plate. Everything is all machined and it's all held on together with fasteners, as is true again for the other Armortek builds. As you can see, this kit here dates back to the 2013 release and is number 24 of the batch. Now, one thing that is noteworthy is that of the front plate. The Armortek King Tiger, it's literally one of the most impressive pieces of the whole kit is literally this front plate here. The front plate is scale thickness, and at 1/6 scale, the plate is literally about 1 inch thick. The plate is substantial in size and also in heft, and it's a very impressive piece of machining and a hallmark of the kit. The plate does have all of its puzzling portions that are represented, and from dry fitting the kit earlier, the pieces do seem to fit quite well. Now, with this generation of King Tiger, in order to fully assemble the hull, you also have to do the same time the assembly of the suspension and the torsion bars. When Armortek re-released the King Tiger in its second incarnation, which was this release over here, they went ahead and revised the way the suspension assembled, and they mimicked that of the system that they have in their 2012 pattern of Tiger 1s. With that system, it does add a little bit more complexity to the build, and again, it forces you to build the suspension at this point here, as opposed to the other variants, which allows you to build the hull as one complete unit and then install the suspension afterwards. As for the breakdown of the parts, we have here the following pieces. Here we have the swing arm with an axle already pre-installed. Now, this was done by the owner of the kit, who started the build himself just prior to sending it off to me to conduct the rest of the assembly and the build. As you can see, there are 2 versions of wheel axle. We have the longer stem and the shorter stem. This is, of course, has to do with the way the King Tiger wheels are interleaved. This version here with the shorter stem is going to be for the outer wheels, and the one with the longer stem will be for the inner. As for the swing arms themselves, they are made from CNC'd aluminum and is pretty much standard on all of the Armortek German tank kits that have been released since around 2004 or so. As for the axles, they are all CNC'd out of steel and with thread directly into this section here, as are some of the other pieces, which I'll go over in a second. Moving from the swing arms takes us to the inner axles. These units here are made from CNC'd steel, and these here connect the swing arm to the torsion bar, which is found on the tank. As you see, they have two little holes that are machined in that are pre-threaded. These are for grub screws, which are used to clamp on this component here to the actual steel torsion bar. Now, if you notice, there are two sets of these components. The reason for that is what is typically done on the Armortek German tanks with the torsion bar suspension is that the first two and the last two torsion bars on the tank are actually a lot thicker compared to the torsion bars that are found in the center portion of the wheels. Because of this, you will have two different sets of these components. One's for larger diameter torsion bars, and the other one's for the thinner diameter torsion bars. These are important as you have to keep the orientation of the two pieces, as you can easily screw up and make a mistake with this. So being vigilant is definitely going to come in effect. Moving on from the main bases takes us to the end sections. Now this is where this version of the King Tiger is different from the last one. Like I mentioned before, this one here emulates that of the 2012 pattern of King Tiger, in which you have this CNC'd steel base, and this, with the aid of a lock washer, gets bolted into the side of the hull. This is why you have to build the suspension along with the hull, as you cannot get the bottom plate of the vehicle fitted to the tank, as the fasteners that hold on the bottom plate also secure that of the torsion bars. Now, with this system here, the Armortek kit is designed so that you can adjust the suspension without having to do any sort of grinding whatsoever to the metal pieces. This is done by the lock washer and that of the side fastener. I'll be going over more about that as the build progresses. Just like with the other steel pieces, these end caps here come in two sizes of torsion bar, the wider and the thinner. And the same exact type of orientation needs to be kept for these, just as the other ones. The last bit is concealed inside of this envelope here. And if I open it, you know what it is. These here are the actual torsion bars themselves. They are pre-cut and sized by Armortek. And what's very nice about them is that they have their flats already pre-machined into the steel. This is a relatively recent addition that the Armortek kits have been doing, and it is definitely one that is a great benefit for the builder, as it saves time in having to grind this section away with your bench grinder to get the same effect. The flats are absolutely necessary to be found on these pieces in order for it to be a good gripping surface for the fasteners to clamp onto. Now again, you have two sets of steel torsion bars. You have the thicker set and the thinner set. If I could get this envelope open, you will be able to see the diameter differences between the two. This is the thicker one and this is the thinner one. And here we have the swing arms all laid out. Now, as you notice, their axles have been pre-threaded onto the aluminum swing arms. This was done by the fellow who, again, purchased the tank and started it himself. Now, the fellow who got the tank up to this part here did a very good job with getting the pieces all threaded on. As you can see, he went ahead and threaded them on fully to the swing arm. This is absolutely required, as if there's any sort of gap here, this will cause a problem with the wheels, as they all need to be timed absolutely perfectly with each other, and as well as with the track. If there's any sort of variations with the height, this will lead to some serious issues. In addition to that, I believe the fellow also went ahead and used securing Loctite in all of these threads here, or some kind of an epoxy to get them firmly in place. This is also very recommended. Now, one modification that I will be doing and adding further to these pieces here is that I will be adding pins to these two sections here and here. The purpose for pinning of the suspension, and in my opinion is absolutely required on a RC tank like this one here, is that one side effect that this type of design may have is that due to the way the pieces are threaded on, if the tank is running, or even if you hit a certain obstacle and the suspension is flexing, the pieces may try to unthread from the housing. This is very less than ideal, and can cause some serious issues as well as a whole bunch of headaches. By pinning the sections in place, these pieces here will be permanently affixed to the torsion bar, and you will never have any sort of worry or any type of other issues with the pieces unthreading from the main axles. The pinning will be done as soon as the other main bases are fastened to these sections here. Just like I always do in these videos, I'm going to show how to do the pinning on the swing arms. To do the pinning, you will require the use of a drill press and a center punch like I have here. Now, the purpose of the center punch is, of course, to properly mark where the hole's got to go, as the drill bit will prevent it from whittling around and drilling a canted hole, which is definitely something that's less than ideal. I'm going to line up these centers just where I think they need to go. Good little tap. It's a little difficult to do with the camera and the tripod in the way, but I'll make do. And with the divots now in place, I can start the drilling. Now, as for the drilling, like I said before, a drill press is going to be used. Now, a drill press is 100% required for this job. There's no way you can physically drill all of the holes by a hand drill and make sure that they're nice and straight. With this, being straight is absolutely paramount, and that's why a drill press is mandatory. For the drill press itself, I'm actually using a small one. This is just an 8-inch drill press. Something like this I personally bought from Sears about 15 years ago, so they're very easy to come by. To drill, I'll first put a drop of oil on the location. Now, it's helpful to use a brand new drill bit for this, as it will cut time in the actual drilling procedure, but as long as you have a good drill bit, you'll be able to perform it. For the size, I'll be using a 3/32 drill bit, as the pins I will be using are around the 3/32 size. Turn on the drill press and start drilling away. Now, when it comes to drilling it out, a good slow and steady speed is all you need. This is not a race. You do not rush the drill bit. Let the bit do its job and cut away the material. Now, keep in mind, you are drilling through two types of material. Drilling through a softer aluminum and a harder steel. So, again, when it comes to drill bit, just give it a little bit of pressure until you feel some giveaway, and then keep going. I'm now going to drill the second hole, and then it will be time to actually do the pinning. With the holes drilled out, I'm going to go and quickly hit the two little burst sections with a file. You don't necessarily have to do that, as when you smash the pins in with the hammer, it might smooth it over. But just for this build here, I'm just going to polish it away with that as my file. Now that the burrs are removed, I will go ahead and start with the pins. Now, for the actual pins itself, I'll be utilizing that of small little ribbed panel board nails. I've also used pop rivets in the past also for the same procedure, either of which will be able to do the job. To first put the pin in, I simply take the nail, slide it in through the hole. Now, I like to remove just a bit of material off of the nail, not too much, as you need that extra material for it to flare in when you're punching it in with the hammer. With that little amount removed, I'm going to tighten the vise so that the jaws are nice and flush. Now I'm going to put the piece down with the head of the pin on the bottom, and with the hammer, I'm just going to simply bludgeon the hell out of it until the piece is nice and flat. Now, obviously, you have to be very careful for your own safety, as you are wielding a hammer and you don't want to hit your hand, which will definitely lead for a bad day. So keep your hands nice and far away, and couple smashes on each side, and the pinning is concluded for this rod anyhow. I will now repeat the same step for the opposite version. And the pinning is now completed. Now, a few people have also used roll pins for the same exact procedure. Personally, I like to use these nails as it also does the same exact job. The pieces are now pinned in place, and you will never have to worry about either of these pieces unthreading on you during operation. After the units are all pinned together, it is then time to install the main torsion bars. Now, the torsion bars do have their flats ground into them, which was done by Armortek and is a nice touch, as in the past this would have to have been done by the builder. As for the installation, it's done with 2 grub screws. Now, once the grub screws get put on, I use blue Loctite on these fasteners here to keep them from budging out on you. Now, even though they are bolted on to their maximum depth, you will have a small little protrusion of the fastener that's left remaining. These here have to be buffed down, as when it comes time to install it into the bushing onto the tank, the bushing is so finely machined that the heads here will make contact with the piece and will prevent the piece from getting slid into its proper location. To polish away this area, I use that of a Dremel with a cutting stone, and I just simply grind away at the tops until they're totally flush with the rest of the steel. This needs to be done to all of the swing arms at this point here. And here are the fasteners now polished away. As you can see, you don't want to remove too much material. You just want to go ahead and just make the surface of the fasteners flush with that of the spindle itself. Now, as for the torsion bars, like I said before, there are 2 sizes. You have the thick and the thinner ones. They are properly labeled on the Armortek packaging. And what's a nice feature is that to prevent any sort of confusion, Armortek, for the 5.5mm versions, which are the thicker ones, they have a small little divot which is machined into both the stem for the swing arm as well as the mounting stem, which is going to be mounted into the tank itself. With these divots present, it is easy to tell and distinguish between the two, which is important as you don't want to mix these up when it comes time for the actual installation to the vehicle. And here are all the torsion bars with their torsion bars connected, as well as with their end pieces also bolted on. Now, as for the end pieces are held on with the same grub fasteners that are used on the other side of the axle. Now, unlike the other side in which I used Loctite and polished away the surface, for these versions here, at this point, I did not use the Loctite. The reason for that is that I just need the pieces to be held on in order for me to mark the location to add the flat, as well as also to get the piece into primer. When it comes time to the actual installation to the vehicle, I'm going to take these off, slip the suspension or the torsion bar back into its lower hull pan, and then rebolt it onto the inside. The reason for doing this, or the reason for this added complexity, is because due to the variations with the torsion bar and how it's installed to the end piece, sometimes you might have a millimeter or two of distance between the piece and the mounting bracket here on the hull. If you go ahead and torque everything down at this point of the build, when it comes time to actually fitting into the vehicle, these small little gaps may cause alignment issues, and the torsion bar might not be seated in fully and might have some variations to their depth. This can cause issues. So this extra bit of complexity is needed in order to get the thing assembled in a nice, consistent manner. Now, like I said before, I'm going to be adding small little flats to the sections of all of these end sections here of the torsion bar. The reason for that is that with this system here that Armortek developed, they developed this system in which you can adjust the height of the suspension to your needs. Now, this system has been incorporated on a few other builds in the past, namely that on their late production Tiger 1 specifically. The concept is smart enough, however, one byproduct that design did have a potential for was, even though you torque the fasteners down as much as you can, the piece can still sag and pivot under the weight of the vehicle, or even worse, during operation. On those 2012 pattern builds, what I like to do is I like to drill small holes on the top portion of these bars here, thread them, and have a secondary fastener clamped down onto them. Armortek redesigned the system, and the system that they came up with is this one here, which utilizes that exact same idea. The torsion bar is held in place via two fasteners. You have one center fastener that bolts in from the side of the hull and also helps hold down the foreplate to the hull itself, but it also has a secondary fastener here which clamps down to the top part of this steel drum to lock it in place and prevent it from pivoting. Now, even though Armortek did the work by doing that, I am still going to add a small little flat to this section here in order for it to be a better gripping surface for this fastener to grip onto, which will eliminate all possibility, or any possibility for that matter, of the pieces being able to still pivot even under the torque of the fastener at hand. Now, to add the flat to the piece, each of the flats need to be in a consistent place, or else the suspension is going to be all over, and that's definitely not beneficial. Now, in the past, I made this jig out of some pieces of scrap wood, which I use solely for that of Armortek German tanks. The way this jig works is that it aligns the torsion bar in its correct location, or its perceived location, and then allows me a way to mark the location with that of a marker. Once all of the locations are marked, I then go with an angle grinder and carefully just remove the amount of material required to make the flat. Now, one change that I did to this jig was that I added this little piece of 1/4 inch scrap wood over here to lower the pitch of the suspension swing arm. As with the King Tiger, it sits a little bit flatter compared to some of the other German tanks that were around, namely that of the Panther, as well as the Tiger 1. By adding this piece of wood over here, this reduces the angle of the torsion bar, and this allows me to mark the piece in a different location. Now, if you notice, I have to hold it at the end portion here of the piece of wood, as opposed to putting it into the hole that I already drilled in back when I designed this thing. The reason for that was that I designed this to use for that of the older pattern of Armortek tanks, which do not have this steel lug mounted in the rear portion of the torsion bar. The way it worked before was that you just had the arm coming out and you stick the bar in, this piece here slides into the hole, and that's how you lock it in place. Obviously, with the different design, I had to adjust the way it sits in. However, I'm still able to get the piece to lock in by simply just locking it into the corner that we have over here. Now, with a Sharpie, I'm going to go ahead and carefully mark the flat point where the piece needs to be ground away. With the piece marked, it is now time to add the flat. The torsion bar is clamped into the vise, and it is clamped in a nice straight manner. Also, you want to have the line nice and parallel, or going straight down the jaws of the vise, as it gives you a nice center point to guide you when it comes time for the grinding. For the grinding itself, I would be utilizing this angle grinder that I have here, which will be doing the job of the cutting. Now, if you don't have an angle grinder, you can do the same job with that of a Dremel with one of those fiberglass type cutting stones, as it will do the same job. However, this will put a lot of more wear and tear on the Dremel as opposed to something like something more industrial like the angle grinder. Now, when it comes time for the flat itself, you don't need to remove a whole lot of material. You just need to make a nice flat section on the metal. Anywhere between an 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch in width is literally all you need. In addition to the width, you also want to keep it nice and level when it comes time with the grinding, as you don't want the piece to have any pitch or yaw to it. A nice level flat is literally all you need to get the job done. And there we have it. The flat has now been added to the torsion bar. And this surface here will be a great surface for the fastener to bolt onto once it's installed into the tank. It's at this point here where the torsion bar can now go into its coat of primer. But before that, I'm going to go ahead and mask up certain sections that I don't want to be covered with paint. And here are all the torsion bars now, fully masked up and ready for the coat of red primer. As for which areas that are masked up, the areas that I masked are the areas that need to make contact with that of the internal bushings and actually need to pivot on them, as well as the areas in which the row wheels actually get mounted and pivot on as well. These areas need to be nice and slick, as well as paint-free, as any paint on these areas here will inhibit the piece from performing its job, and which leads for a less than ideal situation. So, simple stripe of masking tape was added, and now these pieces can go into the next step. Now, if you notice, I didn't go ahead and add any tape to this section here. That's because this is one section to actually want the paint on, as you want this to be nice and secured as possible when it comes time for mounting inside of the tank's recess. So this is why this piece here is left open and will be covered with the coat of primer. While the swing arms are in primer, it's then time to get the lower hull pan ready for primer also. Now, the lower hull pan is already pre-assembled in the configuration that you see here. When you get the kit, the pieces are all obviously disassembled and need to be bolted together. The lower hull pan on the Armortek King Tiger is very true to the original form, in that it's comprised of many different components. On the real King Tiger, the front of the lower hull and the rear panel were actually comprised of two separate panels of steel. This is replicated on the Armortek kit, as you can see here from the lower portion. The way the Armortek kit is designed is you have an aluminum alloy floor plate and a thicker aluminum alloy plate for that of the front portion. Now, the pieces are all bolted together via that of these two main rectangular pieces that we have here on the lower hull. These pieces act as both braces, like I mentioned before, but also act as a way to secure the entire hull together. In addition, of course, that for being the mounts for the torsion bars. As for the pieces themselves, they are also all pre-drilled. Now, we have here the little cup portion that holds on to that steel knob that secures the torsion bar to the tank, and we also have a second hole for that of the swing arm. Now, the swing arm hole has a small little brass bushing that is inserted into the piece. Now, this was already pre-done by the customer of the tank when he first started the project. He pre-installed all of the bushings, and he did a very good job with them, as they will not come out, which is good on him. He also went ahead and painted the two pieces with that of etch primer, which is also a nice touch. Now, I bolted everything together, and this will now go into its coat of primer, and then finally will be installed to the tank. As you can see, I went ahead and masked up the sections for the bushings with that of paper, as well as tape. The reason for this is, of course, when it comes time for the primer, you don't want to get any paint into these sections over here, as this can cause issues with the actual performance of the swing arm. The masking simplifies this, and now with the pieces all masked up, I could go into primer with the whole lower pan. Before I can go ahead and get the lower hull on and get the whole upper and lower hull into primer, I need to go ahead and do some body work. This would include the addition of welds, the deletion of several of the little gaps on the sponsons, which I'll cover in a minute, as well as also modifying the panels at this point to give them a little bit more of a realistic texture. Now, as an example of how the original kit parts are when it comes to their panels, we have here this little section here of the rear plate where it makes contact with the side panel of the upper hull. Now, on the real German tanks, these panels here were all cut with that of a torch, and then these pieces were all basically the shape of puzzle pieces, which would all fit together and weld it together to give you the shape of the hull. Now, on the kit, these panels here are all nicely cut with that of a water jet or a CNC machine, and because of which you're going to have very smooth texturing on these pieces over here. Now, like I said, on the real tank, these were actually cut with a torch, and so you're going to have a lot of torch cut lines in this location over here. To improve the kit, I will be adding the torch cut lines to all these intersecting pieces. This greatly helps improve the overall look of the model compared to leaving the pieces with a smooth finish. Here we can see where the torch cut lines were added. They were added to these two sections over here, which is also the thickest plate of the armor found on this model kit. The torch cut lines were just added with that of a Dremel with a cutting stone, and I just go in random patterns left and right in order to give the illusion that the panels were cut via a torch. This here was also done to where the lower front hull plate meets the front upper hull plate. You can see the torch cut lines that have been added. Now, as for the gaps, these will all be filled in with that of the epoxy weld beads, which I will be sculpting shortly after the tank is ready for that procedure. The torch cut lines were also added to this section here, which is exposed and will be seen by the viewer. The only place where the torch cut lines were not added was that of this small little section here, of where the lower hull front plate meets the side of the hull. If we notice, I went ahead and thoroughly actually blended the plate halves into the side of the hull. The reason for that has to do with that this is totally covered up by the final drive gear once it's fully assembled. Having the detail in this section here is completely unnecessary, and if anything, I went ahead and made it nice and flat and flush with the side of the hull so that once the gear gets mounted in, this will not become a trap for that of the lubricants, which will be added to the final drive gear once assembled. This also seals up this section here and prevents any sort of lubricant to seep into the inside or even on the outside of the hull when the piece is added. However, this is not necessarily a super important procedure to make, but it is one that I did to this build. Now, as for the model sponsons, the sponsons are made of aluminum alloy plate, which is typical for the more current generations of Armortek kits. The Armortek kit is designed just like with the other Armortek kits that have been made in the past, where the sponson connects the lower hull and the upper hulls together. The way this is done is with, of course, the use of fasteners, and the way the Armortek kit does this is, which is the same technique which has been seen on several of the other builds that I've done on the channel in the past, in which the Armortek kit has these little sections here that are laser cut into the metal and that are pre-bent to act as a mounting surface for that of the fastener, which holds everything together. This technique is very effective. It does hold together the tank very well. When it comes to the actual bodywork, there is going to be a small little rectangular hole to contend with in order to remove it to give for a nice flush surface area for the addition of that of the weld beads. In addition to the rectangles, there are also several fastener locations that are located on the bottom of the hull. These two need to be deleted just for detail purposes. And here we have the sections of the hull that have not yet received their torch cut lines. Like I said before, to add it, I'll be utilizing a Dremel with a cutting stone, and I'm just going to go over by hand in several different diagonal patterns, all at random, in order to give the illusion of the torch cut lines. Now, the depth varies. Now, you don't want to go too deep, as these lines are not very deep on the real plate, but they do vary in depth on the real piece as well, but again, not to a real substantial level. As for the cutting stone, I will be utilizing one of those fiberglass high-speed cutting discs, which are found in basically all home improvement stores. I will start the cutting. And also, of course, you want to wear some kind of a respirator or even safety glasses, as this procedure does kick up a lot of dirt, debris, and residue. And here are the panels now with all of their welds added. As you see, it's a very simple procedure and is one that is done fairly quickly. And when you're done, you do have a very nice realistic result with that of the torch cut lines. Now, as you notice, the ends do get chewed up a little bit due to the shape of the cutting stone. However, luckily, these will all be covered up with that of the sculpted weld beads, which is why it's imperative to do this procedure before you do the welds. Now, as for the welds, I will be utilizing my standard epoxy sculpting method, and I know I'm going to be getting this question asked, as a lot of people have asked in the past, but is it possible to weld these panels actually together? And the answer is yes. However, being aluminum, you're probably going to have to use some kind of a TIG style system. I do not have that welding technology in my shop, so the standard method of that of the fasteners with that of the sculpted weld beads are more than adequate for the job at hand. Another modification that I made to the hull at this point is the addition of the EastCoastArmory.com internal shock absorber detail plugs. Now, just like on the Tiger 1 and as well as the Panther, the King Tiger was the exact same way, in which the torsion bars themselves, on the first and last torsion bar, to add extra strength and rigidity to the piece, the Germans have an internal shock absorber that is found on the inside portion of the hull. The way it's viewed on the outside of the tank is that we have this plug that is then welded to the outside of the vehicle. Now, the vehicle has 4 of these units, 2 per side. One is in the back, and the other one, if I pan over, is all the way there up near the front. The kit does have these locations pre-found into the kit, and the kit has these small little metal lugs which get fitted into the holes that are pre-drilled in for this exact same detail purposes. However, rather than utilizing the kit version, I went ahead and replaced them with the resin versions from East Coast Armory. The ECA ones are a drop-in installation. However, to add them, you will need to make 2 modifications. First, the hole that is found on the Armortek kit is slightly smaller than the ECA resin plug, and to enlarge it, you simply take a 1/2-inch drill bit and you drill directly through the plate. Now, the plugs here are designed for the Armortek Tiger 1, and the King Tiger, the armor plate on the side, is a little bit thicker compared to the version on the Tiger 1. To mount it to the King Tiger, I went ahead and deleted the little molded-in shelf, which you can see in the corner picture below. That corner-in shelf is meant to be a stop that prevents the piece from being overexerted onto the piece, and also acts as a point to glue it to the hull. Because of the plate's thickness on the King Tiger, the piece would not emerge properly. So what I went ahead and did was I simply removed the little shelf with that of the lathe, thus making the piece able to fit into the plate, and I adjusted it to the proper height. Now, if a lathe is not present and you're using the ECA piece, you can still do the same modification. You just simply amputate that section of the plug. The plug is deep enough so that even with that little section removed, you should still have enough meat to grasp onto the kit. The pieces are super glued in place, and then once fully dry, I'm going to go ahead and add the detail sculpted of the weld beads. Moving back to the sponson, here you can see the bodywork has now been added, and the little holes that were present have been thoroughly blended in with the bodywork. It is at this point now where I can go ahead and add the sculpted weld bead detailing. And here's the lower hull, now with its coat of red primer. And from here, I could go ahead and start installation of the floor, as well as the torsion bars. With the hull flipped upside down, you can see the sculpted weld bead work that was added to where the sponsons meet the hull panels, as well as the shock absorber lugs, and also the front hull puzzle piece. In addition to the weld work done to the front, the versions on the rear were also completed. This, of course, is a mirror image on both sides of the tank. With the hull right side up, I was able to put the floor pan on the bottom of the hull, and right now the hull is actually sitting on top of the floor pan. Soon the torsion bars will be added, which will then secure everything in place. Now the first step required in order to assemble, or I should say install the swing arms, is the addition of the little rubber O-ring. These are kit supplied and are a nice feature that have been found on Armortek German tank kits now for a number of years. I've mentioned this in a few of the other videos where these rings are present. Basically, they seal off the swing arm from the outside environment of the tank. Now, the kits are designed to be used with these pieces and have their little recesses pre-machined into the plates as well as into the retaining block. They simply get mounted inside of their little recess. To do that, it's best done before anything gets mounted. Now, if you follow the instruction, they want you to put this over the swing arm and then try to sandwich it in that way. From my experience, it's best to just simply snake the little rubber O-ring into place and then just add the swing arms afterward. I'm going to go ahead and get this piece installed. You simply just fit the O-ring into the little hole. Now, I have my other hand on the inside of the hull, as you can see my pinky, and with my pinky I'm just securing a piece of the O-ring into the little machined little sleeve, and so that holds it in, and then the rest of the O-ring will fall into place. And here's one whole side of the suspension now completed. Now, I'm going to go over the installation of the suspension pieces. However, it is important to keep in mind that the suspension installation on this type of tank is going to be a little bit on the convoluted end. However, it's one of those things that it does require a lot of steps, but if it's done carefully and slowly by the builder, you should have a decent time in getting everything together without any issues. And here we have the opposite side of the suspension. As you can see, the fasteners are now fully mounted, and like I said before, they serve as two functions. They hold the suspension arm in place, but more importantly, they also secure the bottom floor pan to the rest of the hull. Once the fasteners on the opposite side get mounted on, the hull will be completed as one whole piece. Okay, when it comes time to actually installing the suspension, like I said before, it can get very complicated and very confusing very quickly. Namely with the actual torsion bar types. Remember, this has thick and thin torsion bars, and the orientation needs to be kept in line. In addition to that, you also have to make sure you have the proper torsion bar for that of an outer row wheel as opposed to an inner row wheel per the unit required. Now, this does sound a bit overwhelming. However, the instructions does have this laid out pretty well. So if you pay attention to the instruction sheet, you should be able to get through the installation. As you can see, the torsion bars that are listed in red are the thicker ones. So, namely the ones, the 5.5 millimeter ones, the ones that have a little center divot on the two corresponding locations. The other ones, which are thinner, are rendered in this drawing over here with that of orange. In addition to that, you also have to pay attention to the outer as opposed to the inner axles, which are found on each of the pieces. I found the best way to do these installs is to start from the front and work your way to the back. Once one side is completed, you then reverse the operation on the opposite side. This alleviates and should remove any confusion in terms of both thicknesses of the torsion bar as well as even the shaft diameters themselves. And here we have half of the swing arms now fully mounted to the model. The first three are the thicker 5.5 millimeter ones, and the one on the end is with the thinner version. The next one to follow, which I'm going to be installing on camera, is going to be another one of the thinner ones. However, the installation of the swing arms, regardless of the thickness of the torsion bar or even the length of the axle, is exactly the same and is standardized for all of the units. Here we have our next swing arm, which is going to be mounted. Now this is the thinner axle, you can tell just by visual inspection, but more importantly it doesn't have the third dimple which is found on both sides of the axle. Now the first thing that needs to be done is the removal of the tape. Once the protective tape is removed, the swing arm is ready for its next step. With tape removed, the next step is to remove the mounting lug that we have on the opposite end. If we recall from when I was assembling these pieces, I did not super tighten the fasteners here, nor did I add Loctite to them at that time. The reason for which was, like I said before, you cannot get these pieces to fit inside of the hull with this component fitted. So it needs to be removed. I will first loosen the two little fasteners. And the piece will simply slide off the axle. The axle now will be getting a coat of grease on its exposed steel area here. This is the portion that rides inside of the bushing and needs to pivot, so lubrication is going to be needed. The lubrication also helps protect the steel and prevent it from rusting. A little bit of my usual red high temperature grease, or marine grease can also be used. And just a quick little smear. If you notice, I'm rotating the swing arm while holding the other end, which makes for a nice even application of the lubricant. With the piece now greased up, it's ready to be slid into place. Now, I'm just going to simply install the piece so it hangs up here on this end of the axle. The reason for that is I'm going to install the other end portion to the inside. So I just line it up and let it hang over there for a moment. And here goes the lug that needs to be mounted over here. Now before I do that, I'm going to remove these fasteners completely in order for me to put a drop of Loctite on. For the thread lock, I'll be utilizing blue thread lock, which gives it for a nice strong bond. It prevents the fasteners from backing out. But if I ever have to take them out fully, the Loctite will give before the grub screws strip out, which is important as grub screws do have a habit on doing that. I'm just going to thread them in loosely, just so that they grip onto the piece. You don't want to thread them in all the way at the moment, as again, you need to get them onto the axle. Once the pieces have more Loctite on, it's then time to put the lock washer into this cavity over here. These lock washers are supplied with the kit. And in addition to the lock washer, I'm also going to apply a little bit of Loctite again to the fastener, which will enter into this portion here from the outside of the reverse side. I will first put a little bit of thread lock on this fastener, like that. Hold the fastener here with my finger. Make sure that it's nice and flush to the side of the hull, as when it comes time for the fastener to go in, it could knock the fastener out of the way, or the washer out of the way, and will just make the installation a little bit more problematic than it needs to be. So, okay, the fastener and the lock washer are now mated to each other. Now this piece here gets slid, mounted into there like that. Now if you notice, the tolerances are very tight, which is exactly what you want, so you just want to poke it in just so it stays put. It's at this point now where I can take the swing arm and guide it into its location. Now it's at this point here I'm going to line up the flats to the fasteners. Now it's very important that you do this per unit. You don't want to take off all of these pieces and then mount them to the tank and then try to mount the swing arms as an after fact. The reason for that has to do with the orientation of the flat that was ground into the piece. As you can see, no two of these units have the flats in the same location. Because of that, each piece is directly mated to its matching swing arm. If this gets jumbled or mixed up, this is going to lead to nothing but issues with your suspension, so you want to avoid that at all costs. The best way to do that is doing it individually like I am over here. As for this piece over here, the flat is lined up with the threads, And with a Allen wrench, I'm going to go ahead and tighten the fasteners. Now, I'm not going to tighten them all the way. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to bottom them out. And then once I hit the bottom, I'm going to loosen it just slightly. The reason for that is that you want the piece to be indexed properly, but not gripped onto the axle or to the torsion bar. The reason for that has to do when it comes time for mounting on the fastener on the reverse end. So I'm going to do the same thing with this guy over here. All right, see, it's locked, but it's not thoroughly locked on in its location. Now, I'm going to line up the reverse flat here, and I'm going to add the other locking fastener to this location. Basically, for the same reason like I did before, I'm going to add a drop of Loctite to the bolt and thread it into its location. Again, this is just for indexing of this piece to make sure it's nice and straight. Once the other section is indexed, it is time to fully seat the swing arm to the hull. That's going to be aided with that of a rubber mallet. And I'm going to tap it in with a little bit of force until the swing arm is as far in as it can go. Now, this has to be very importantly done, in that if there's any sort of gap and variation between the two swing arms, this is going to cause issue with the actual wheel alignment. Like I said, with these German tanks, wheel alignment is very crucial because of the way the interwoven wheels work, along with the track teeth. Everything needs to be timed absolutely perfectly. So with the mallet, the piece is now fully seated. Okay, hopefully it was caught on camera, the lug being pulled into the hull. Now, the amount that the piece moves will depend on the actual orientation of the lug when you slide it back onto the torsion bar. Sometimes it moves a little bit, sometimes it moves a lot. However, once the fastener is fully tightened, which it is currently at the moment, the lug is now fully bottomed out to the hull, and the length of the torsion bar is set. This is again important as you want to have everything in a constant manner, which again will make for a constant wheel alignment, which will improve the performance of the model. Now, even though the piece is fully tightened to the hull, I still need to tighten those two little grub fasteners which are found on the other end. To do that, I'm going to loosen slightly the fastener that I just tightened. Like I said before, this is a little bit of a back and forth type of a installation. So you're going to be loosening and tightening sometimes the fasteners several times. Now, this also depends on, again, the orientation of the lug. In this case, these fasteners here are on the opposite side of the top, which makes getting and tightening them a little bit more problematic as opposed to this guy over here, which has his fasteners completely facing upward. So what I did was I loosened the fastener just slightly, just enough for me to rotate the torsion bar. As you can see, this fastener is not making contact with the piece at the moment either, which makes the piece able to rotate. Obviously, once the thing is fully tightened, having the piece rotate on you is definitely not going to be ideal. So now that the torsion bar is set, just want to double check. Okay, everything's good to go. Let me go ahead with the Allen wrench and tighten the fasteners to a more appropriate torque. A little extra thread lock, you don't need that. Okay, now that the fasteners are fully torqued down, I'm going to rotate the swing arm back to where it needs to be. Now I have the flat pointing upward. I'm going to retighten some of the bolts. Just hand tighten this one at the moment. And now I'm going to tighten the one on the outside of the hull fully. Okay, that's fully torqued down. And now I'm going to torque this guy down, which will grab onto this flat that we ground into the torsion bar in an earlier scene. There we go. And the piece is now fully mounted. I'm currently moving this swing arm from the opposite end, and you will notice that it will not move in this all-important location. With this one out of the way, it's time to move on to the next one. The steps are repeated all the way until you're done with the suspension. Like I said before, it is a task which is actually very reminiscent to the real German tanks, as this suspension system was very complex even on the real ones. As you can see, this torsion bar here, which is the next one from the one I just installed, had more of a pull-in compared to the last one. I wanted to get that on screen just to show the viewer the difference between each torsion bar. Sometimes it moves in a little, sometimes it moves in a lot. It is because of this variation why you have to separate these pieces and assemble them in this manner, as opposed to building them as a complete sub-assembly and installing them in one piece. You can go ahead and get these pieces fully assembled and then grind down the grub screws and install them as one unit, like I've actually did on a couple of my past builds. However, I found out when it comes time to installation that it adds a bit of problems and a little bit of a headache, in that now you have to loosen those fasteners because it's not fully bottoming out in the correct location. By doing it this way, it's a little bit more complicated, but in the end makes for a more easy installation, or I should say a more problem-free installation, as opposed to doing it the sub-assembly route. I will now tighten up these fasteners and progress with the other ones. Also, this swing arm, as opposed to the last one, has the mounting grub fasteners pointing upward, which makes tightening them a lot easier compared to the last one. Again, this is purely at the luck of the draw, and this can change between swing arm to swing arm, which again is why it's important not to separate these pieces during the construction phase. While installing the final torsion bar, it's important to point out another trait which is found on these tanks, which, if encountered by another builder, may confuse them, and they may be wondering if there's a problem and if there's anything going on. The Armortek King Tiger, again, has these long bars that run across the lower hull. Like I also mentioned before, there are brass machined bushings that are mounted on the inside. Now, on this particular build here, these were pre-installed by the owner of the tank. He used a certain type of epoxy, which was a nice, strong material, and he did a very good job with the installation. It's actually one that I would recommend myself. When it comes time to the installation, though, you'll notice that all of them have a slight bit of the brass bushing protruding from the aluminum. This is absolutely normal. If you notice that once all the swing arms are mounted on, you will have a little bit of bushing exposed. The reason for this has to do with the shape of the actual axle that's found on the torsion bar. When you install it to the tank, it's going to stop against the bushing, and at that point there you will think to yourself, I have the piece now fully seated. Actuality, you don't. When it rests up against the bushing, the swing arm is going to be sitting above the hull approximately 1/16 of an inch. To get the piece fully seated in, that's when with the extra whack of the rubber mallet will come in handy. I'll show how much the piece pops out when the piece gets hammered in. Keep in mind, this torsion bar here went through the other stages which I discussed earlier on. Right before I hammer it in, I might as well show what the torsion bar looks like. This is the final torsion bar. As you can see, it still has that little bit of an 1/8 of an inch bit of steel that is exposed. The other versions are absolutely flush with the hull of the tank. This here is what I was referring to. If this is put in manually, and you'll see that it rests up against the bushing like I mentioned before. For me to fully seat it in, I'm going to whack it with the rubber mallet, which will make the bushing protrude slightly from the interior. Again, this is absolutely normal and is definitely something that is seen on many of my other Armortek builds that I have posted on the channel in the past. And there you can see the bushing now emerged. The torsion bar is now fully seated to the piece. With the torsion bars affixed, you can see how that they are working in their proper manner. Now, of course, the ones in the front are a lot stiffer compared to the ones in the middle, and this is present when you put pressure on the torsion bars themselves. However, you can see that after the weight is applied, the piece will bounce back to its original state, which is exactly what you're looking for when it comes to these suspension systems. With the suspension system now out of the way, the next step of the build takes place, which is that of adding on a few of the lower hull accessories. More information about this will come in an upcoming video. With the torsion bars affixed, you can see how that they are working in their proper manner. Now, of course, the ones in the front are a lot stiffer compared to the ones in the middle, and this is present when you put pressure on the torsion bars themselves. However, you can see that after the weight is applied, the piece will bounce back to its original state, which is exactly what you're looking for when it comes to these suspension systems. With the suspension system now out of the way, the next step of the build takes place, which is that of adding on a few of the lower hull accessories. More information about this will come in an upcoming video. And with that, that wraps up this project start video for this 1/6 scale Armortek radio-controlled German King Tiger heavy tank. If you like this video, stop by and like us on Facebook, where there are more photographs of this particular build that have been posted, as well as the other builds that have been built throughout the years, as well as the other builds that are currently going on at this time. In addition to that, don't forget to swing by eastcoastarmory.com for more 1/6 and 1/16 scale build and detail components. Thanks for watching.